Good morning, F&M. I cannot tell you how moving this is for a lot of reasons. When I first got word that I was invited to come speak to you at commencement today, I had just landed in Ohio at an airport and was getting ready to go cover a campaign event in Zanesville, Ohio. And I got word that I was receiving this invitation, and I just broke down in tears in the middle of Terminal A in the Columbus, Ohio airport. So I just want to thank the trustees, the students, the faculty, President Fry, this entire community for this day and inviting me to come share this with you. I grew up right over there at the corner of College Avenue and Harrisburg Pike. And on graduation day, I would often come here and I would attend this day and see all of you get your diplomas and listen to the commencement speaker, one of whom was the late Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun. So to be standing right here in this spot is so humbling and so unexpected, I can't even explain it to you. And many of you know how very personal this day is for me. My mother taught here for 17 years, and many of you who took psychology had her in class, and if you didn't have her in class, you might have remembered her at just about every women's basketball game, usually behind the bench, usually screaming at the refs. Or maybe you were part of her Pittsburgh Steelers fan club and went over to my living room, standing there watching Steelers games with her, waving a terrible towel, going crazy on Sunday afternoons. Or maybe you just met her when she was walking across this green right here with her two dogs, when she loved nothing more than to chat with students, to chat with all of her friends in every department, office, and building on this campus, or friends from the neighborhood. She would probably offer you some advice. She would probably ask you who you were dating. In every way, F&M was really like home to me, and still is. And I feel like I grew up here, and there were times when I didn't realize how very much part of this community I was. As a kid, I would walk across campus, and I would run into students, and they would sometimes tell me, hey, we have your mom in class, and she was just talking about child development the other day. And she told this fabulous story about when you were a baby, and you were in the bathtub, and you started screaming, and she realized you had just discovered that you were a boy. And then the conversation with these students became incredibly awkward. And I would ask my mother about these little stories, and she said, come on, it's not like these stories are ever going to get back to your friends. And then I went to college at Harvard, and it was about my third day. I was just getting used to my freshman dorm, and one of my floor mates came in and said, hey, does your mom teach at F&M? And I said, uh-huh. And he said, my best friend from high school has her in class. I heard she was just telling this great story the other day about you in a bathtub. And that story has been following me through college and to Washington, where my dear friends sometimes still bring it up, sometimes today. So I've been in Washington about 10 years now, and I was first a newspaper reporter, and then a few years ago made the switch to radio. And there are a few things you have to learn when you make a switch like that, and because of that, there were a couple of Lancaster County pilots who made the beginning of my job very, very difficult. We have a tiny little soundproof booth in the basement of the White House where my colleague and I cover President Bush for National Public Radio. And I remember one of my first days being very, very excited. I'm in radio, I'm in NPR, I'm sitting there, I'm covering the White House. And because I was a print reporter, I hadn't realized the importance of keeping your soundproof door open when you weren't doing something, because when it's closed, you really don't know what's going on in the rest of the world. And my editor called, and he was really frantic, and he said, David, what's going on? And I said, oh, well, I'm here, covering the White House. And he said, wasn't the White House just evacuated? And I said, Ron, I'm going to check on that. And I opened up the soundproof door, and it was quiet. And there was a Secret Service agent standing there, and I said, hi. So what's happening? And he said, well, we've evacuated. There's a small plane that's been entering White House airspace, and we've cleared everyone out. But, sir, you might want to just stay now. We're telling the stragglers it's actually safer that they just stay behind. This was not the best first impression to make on an editor to have him call you at the White House and let you know that the White House had been evacuated. But things have improved from there, and I spent the last few years covering some powerful and influential people like George W. Bush and more recently Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And everyone always asked me, what's a day like? And just for a snapshot from last weekend, I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, said goodbye to my wife, jumped on a bus, went to the airport, flew to West Virginia, watched Hillary Clinton give a speech, flew 3 hours west to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, watched her speak in an airport hangar, landed in Oregon, watched her speak, give the same speech there, and then landed in Portland, Oregon at a hotel at 2 o'clock in the morning, which was 5 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. So that was a solid 23-hour day, and really productive. But necessary, because you have to be near the people you're covering in these jobs. But it's also, and you realize this on days like this, it's so important to get away from the planes and the buses sometimes and to find the story of politics somewhere else. And this is where I often look to a lesson from my mother. Those of you who knew Terry Green when she was here knew how much she just loved and appreciated people. Whether you were a student that she had never met, or you were the mechanic repairing her car, or you just bumped into her at an airport, she would always have a question for you, she would always be curious, and she really believed that everyone, no matter who you were, had a story to tell. And I remind myself that lesson every day, and I think it's a lesson that has really helped me cover politics. I know that lesson from my mother led me to 3 women who informed my reporting and taught me more than any regular day on the campaign trail ever could. So I want to introduce you really briefly to the 3 women. But the first is Ethel Williams, and I met her a few months after Hurricane Katrina. I was traveling with President Bush, and he went to visit Ethel's home in the 9th Ward, which had been completely destroyed. Just the frame was left, and all you could recognize was where her bathroom once was, because there was a toilet and bathtub still sitting there, and that was it. And Ethel was a spunky little 74-year-old woman. And she wandered around her house with President Bush, and then the 2 of them came out and spoke to the cameras, and President Bush was joking with her and said that Ethel promised to cook them a meal as soon as we get your house back up. And about 6 months after the president's visit, I went back to New Orleans myself to talk to Ethel, and she was still living with her daughter outside the city because her home in the 9th Ward was still just a pile of debris. And Ethel was frustrated. She felt that the president gave her an impression that her home would be rebuilt sooner. But I expected Ethel to feel totally betrayed by the President of the United States and to be furious. And what shocked me was that she excused him. You got a lot of things on your mind, she told me. I know I do. And some things you forget. I just feel it's an overlook. I feel that when he hears about this, he'll say, "Oh, Mrs. Williams." And that'll be it. I'll get something done. Now I pushed Ethel. I said, "Mrs. Williams, with all due respect, this is a politician we're talking about. People say politicians are the last people we should ever trust." And she said, "No, the president's going to get me that house." And she looked me in the eye and said, "What's your name? I'm going to call you." And I said, "What are you going to tell me, Mrs. Williams?" And she said, "I'm in my house that the president got for me." I met 2 other women while I was covering a campaign in Iowa a few months ago, and the first of the 2 is Anita Esterday. She is a waitress at a little diner called the Maidright at the intersection of Route 30 and 63. They're famous for their loose meat sandwiches, which are delicious. They describe them as a sloppy Joe without the sloppy. And Anita Esterday wears the same red apron every day. She's a single mom and was working at the diner and at a nursing home. And I came across Anita when I was on a bus tour with Hillary Clinton across Iowa. And Hillary Clinton stopped in, sat at the lunch counter, and ordered one of the famous sandwiches from Anita. And the waitress and the presidential candidate talked for a while. Anita told Hillary Clinton all about the struggles that she faces every day. And after Hillary Clinton was done listening and left the diner, she went on to other cities in Iowa. And Anita became part of her stump speech. She kept bringing her up and saying, "I met this waitress, and this waitress really represents the struggles of hardworking Americans." And Clinton said she knows how hard Anita has it. So I went back to that diner a few weeks later and I sat down with Anita. She said she was a little upset because Hillary Clinton went and talked about her at other cities behind her back, and she thought that was a little rude the way she sees it. And I asked Anita, do you feel like Hillary Clinton really connected with you? Do you feel like she got you? And she said, "I don't really think that she did." Because as it turned out, after Hillary Clinton ate her sandwich and left the diner with all of her staff, Anita never got a tip. And this story made all the blogs, and I was in a long back and forth with the Clinton campaign about whether there had been a tip left somewhere that maybe Anita just didn't know about. But I was most interested in Anita more than any tip. She didn't get money from a presidential candidate, and Clinton used Anita's story in her stump speech. But Anita said aside from all that, she enjoyed chatting with this former First Lady and presidential hopeful. I got my 15 minutes of fame out of the world, Anita told me. I got her autograph, and that's something I will treasure forever. And finally, when I was in Iowa, I also was covering Barack Obama for a while, and there was a town hall meeting at the fairgrounds in Independence, Iowa. Obama took some questions, and the first person to stand up was a woman named Jerry Putney, and she was really nervous. She grabbed the microphone and she stood up and said, "Hi, Obama!" And then right in front of Obama and the entire audience, Jerry started to cry. And Obama walked over and put his arm around her, and Jerry began speaking to him and said, "I have a brother," she's talking in the microphone, "I have a brother who's dying of cancer, and for him to be able to keep his health insurance, he has to keep working. He has lymphoma and leukemia, and they're both in stage 3. And this quieted the whole crowd. And Obama stood there and told Jerry that as president, he'd make sure all Americans have access to health insurance. And then Obama told Jerry that he really wants to write her brother a letter and is going to try to do that. And then Obama went on to some other questions. So I went back to see Jerry a couple weeks later. And nobody, not Obama, not anyone on the campaign, had ever written a letter to Jerry's brother or got in touch with them. And Jerry started crying while she was sitting with me. This is a woman who had a hard life. She lost a younger brother when she was younger. He died in a July 4th fireworks accident. And then now her other brother was dying of cancer. And I said, "Jerry, how do you feel right now? Are you disappointed that Obama didn't write to you, to your brother?" And she said, "No. He didn't have time, I guess," Jerry said. "I understand, you know, because he was being bombarded by so many people. But just knowing that he knows, that means more than any note." It turns out Jerry had seen Obama on a campaign commercial, and she said she went to see him that day because she wanted someone to notice her and her family. And she told me she got exactly what she had come for. On any given day out there on the campaign trail, politicians see a lot of faces and they shake a lot of hands. And they speed past people at one campaign event after another. And in many ways, people like Ethel and Anita and Jerry become little more than props, part of the day's stagecraft. And as a journalist, on these crazy days, on these trips, and in the world of politics, rushing along in the buses and planes, I know how easy it can be to forget those people you come across. And it was really because of my mother's lesson that was ingrained in me that I put the brakes on and went back to find Ethel and Anita and Jerry. And in doing so, I met 3 remarkable women who sure had some stories to tell. And they gave me such insight into the world of politics and broke a lot of the assumptions that I have. Ethel taught me how in this world of cynicism, there are some people who still want to believe their leaders can solve their problems. Anita taught me that the world of politics isn't always so black and white. You can feel like a former First Lady doesn't quite get you, but you cherish the chance to sit down and talk with her. And Jerry showed the personal connection that someone can feel with a politician, even after just seeing a few campaign commercials. Being interested in the lives of people like these 3 women, it really is just about human decency. But I can also tell you that that mindset has made me a better person and no doubt made me better at the job that I do every day. And I think my mother's lesson that everyone has a story to tell is something that we'd all be wise to think about. So after you all come up and get your diplomas, you're going to head off and pursue the dreams that you have. And knowing the stellar education that you have gotten at this institution, and knowing the character of this college, and knowing very intimately the types of experiences that you've had here since I grew up here, you're sure to be in jobs and professions that are going to put you right at the top if you want to be there. You'll be in positions of power and responsibility. And all I can say is never forget the people around you. If you're a doctor, maybe ask a patient that extra question about his or her life. It might help you understand your next patient better. If you're a consultant hired to help a company, remember that every single person who works in that company, from the CEO straight down, might have some really smart insight into what works at that company and what doesn't. And if you're a teacher, be curious about the lives of your students. My mother always was, and she knew that that made her a much better teacher. It's really about just respecting other people and being interested in their stories. And it's advice that I think my mother probably would have given you if she were standing right here today, and there's no doubt it's advice that I live by. So I really appreciate the chance to talk to you. This is the most tremendous honor you can imagine, and best of luck to the graduates, and thank you to the community. So